Have you ever heard the sound of freedom? Have you ever heard the sound of freedom?
You're listening to The Flip Side with Noah Filipiak, connecting the reality of the gospel to the grid of life. You can support the podcast and pick up some sweet Flipside swag at www.patreon.com/Noah Filipiak.
What up? What up? What up, Flip-A-Pon-A-My? Welcome to episode 89 of the Flip Side podcast. Today is a fun episode. I'm doing a group conversation with 4 church planters. I'm one of them. And the 4 of us were together for 6 months in a cohort. We all are church planters with the Evangelical Covenant denomination, the ECC, Evangelical Covenant Church. And we got to know each other well. We're all over the country. And I thought a conversation amongst church planters that are just starting out, we are in the trenches, we're going through the ups and downs of church planting, would fit well with some of the themes we've been talking about recently here on the Flip Side, as we've been talking about church health. We've been talking about different ways of doing church. I just interviewed Peter Sung, episode 87 of the Flip Side, just 2 episodes ago. Peter he's on staff with the ECC, and he was in charge of our cohort. So it was a small cohort of just our group of 4 planters that we're going to hear today, and then one more, and then Peter, who was leading us through the material. And, you know, we've talked a fair amount here and there about the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast, and that was something many people listened to, and I think it really exposed some things in the church that we have really praised as the American church, the size of churches and even some of the fame and the celebrityism of certain pastors. And we have seen, not just from Mark Driscoll and Mars Hill, Seattle, but also Willow Creek, the Hillsong documentaries that have come out. We've seen that bigger isn't always better, and that, in fact, maybe bigger sometimes can be the cause of things not being better. I just realized, here we are live as I talk, I did a whole episode on my thoughts on the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, on Hillsong, and on Willow Creek, and I'm trying to find that. While I'm going to find that, I will tell you that I interviewed Laura Tarro, who is in the group of 4 today, in episode 74, talking about church planting as a woman pastor. And also in our little group of 4 today, us 4 church planters, Laura is there. Laura is the founding pastor and senior pastor at Bethany Covenant Church in St. Charles, Illinois, and she'll be coming on for her second time here on the Flip Side. Also is Cindy Riley, New Beacon Covenant Church in Swannanoa, North Carolina. I like that town's name because it has Noah in the name, so I feel like I would, be famous there. Josh Cramer at Resurrection Covenant in Boise, Idaho, and just all kinds of podcast connections going on here. I'm getting ahead of myself. So episode 68 of The Flip Side, you can go back and listen to my thoughts on Hillsong Exposed, the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, and Willow Creek. I was also going to mention episodes, 79 and 80. I interviewed Greg Coles, and Greg Coles is on the leadership team at Resurrection Covenant Boise with Josh. Did you know that it's Boise? My whole life it has been Boise. If anyone watches college football, they always say Boise State. And then I was interviewing, I think it was when I was talking to Preston Sprinkle. He's been on the show a couple times, and he kept saying Boise. And I'm like, you're saying your own city wrong. No, the rest of us say it wrong. It's Boise with an S, just like it's spelled. The things you learn on the Flip Side. So excited to get into that conversation. And we talk about, we're 4 church planters pastoring small churches, struggling with some of the insecurities of that, but also, trying to get to the heart of what is discipleship, what is a healthy church, and just wrestling through the reality of church planting. Something I like to do when it comes to church planting is just expose some of the myths. I feel like almost every church planter I know we all have been under this delusion that we're going to plant a church, have this big launch, and the thing's just going to go grow, and as if that's what's expected, that's what success is, and there's pressure on us to do that. And for almost every church planter I know, and I know quite a few over the course of now, I don't know, 2005 is when I started my first church plant. So do the math on that. Almost every church planter I know, it is a grind, and it is like a boxing match, and you take a lot of hits, and it's a calling. It's fulfilling. I'm not complaining, but I just want us to. I don't like us setting up church plants as these places where celebrity pastors are born, so to speak. And I think we can it would be healthy in the church if we got rid of the whole celebrity thing. It's really silly. And so I just want to have some real conversations today with some church plants. We are all in the early stages of church planting. So before we get to that, let me mention, if you want to watch this episode, you can do so at youtube.com/Noah Filipiak. At some point in the middle of the interview, we're on Zoom, and these birthday balloons all just appeared on my square. I have no idea who did it. I blame Josh for doing it. He said he didn't know how to do it. If he did, he would do it. He would do it more. So if you're watching on YouTube, you'll get to see that. Josh had some mug envy. My third favorite podcast is The Flip Side. It should be your third favorite podcast as well. That's our goal around here. If you'd like to get a mug, like I told Josh, you need to become a patron on Patreon. You can head over to patreon.com/Noah Filipiak if you want to support the show. Get yourself some sweet swag. In my mug is my Angry Brew. Shout out to Angry Brew, and a big thanks for sponsoring the podcast. Go to angrybrew.com, fivelakes.com, pick up a bag of Chris's Blend or Angry Brew, and get 10% off your order when you use promo code FLIP. I do talk to an interview about how at Mosaic, my church plant, we're moving towards a co-pastor model, which we're going to start with a residency and then move that prayerfully into a co-pastor in the future as we discern the right fit for that. And what that means is I'm working towards going half-time at my church, and if you'd like to support me in that, one way you can do that is I set up a new nonprofit called Beyond Ministries. That's my Beyond the Battle ministry and our groups, which you can join a group at beyondthebattle.net. But it also encompasses the podcast and encompasses future writing, current books that I'm working on. I'm working on a science fiction novel right now, as well as a teenager edition of Beyond the Battle that'll be for both teen guys and teen girls. And it'll be about 50 or 60 pages. I'm almost done with that. But the goal is to get enough income coming in from these other sources where I can go half-time at the church to create space for this residency and eventual co-pastor. So if you'd like to support that, it is a tax-deductible gift. You can go to noahfilipiak.com/give or beyondthebattle.net/give, and you can do a recurring gift there. That's a lot of websites. I'm sorry. But all right. So, hey, let's jump in to this interview, and I hope it's helpful to you as a Christian. I just hope we are all prayerful about what makes a healthy church, what makes the church healthy, and even maybe some ways for you, if you're not in church leadership, if you're an attender of a church, what are some ways maybe you can make your church healthier? Or if you're not going to church, I would encourage you to start. And maybe there's certain ingredients you'll find in our conversation today that will help you hone in on what you're looking for in a church. So without further ado, I haven't said that in a while. It's exciting to say that again. Without further ado, we're going to jump into this conversation between Laura Tarro, Cindy Riley, Josh Cramer, and myself. Here we go.
Heard the sound of freedom. Have you ever heard the sound of freedom?
All right. Welcome, friends, to The Flip Side. This is my first ever group interview. So this is very, very exciting. So we'll go around here. We got the Brady Bunch squares up here on Zoom, and just introduce yourselves. I guess I'm just going on my screen clockwise. Cindy, Josh, Laura, share your name, where you're from, and maybe just a little bit about the stage that your church plant is in.
Okay. I'm Cindy Riley. I'm in Swannanoa, North Carolina. We are in a restart phase. We've been going for about a year and a half, and had a good start, and then hit some hiccups. And my husband and I finally moved into the community, and it feels like we're in a restart, building back up again.
Great. Thanks, Cindy.
I'm Josh Cramer. I'm in Boise, Idaho. We are... we're moving. We've been going for about a year and a half. We launched Easter 22, and things feel, like they're kind of rolling along at this stage. So,
did you share the name of your church, you guys?
No.
Go ahead, do that. Cindy, what's the name of your church?
New Beacon Covenant Church.
All right, Josh?
We're Resurrection Covenant Boise.
Great, thanks. All right, how about you, Laura?
Yeah, Laura Tarro, and our church is Bethany Covenant Church. We're in St. Charles, Illinois, which is a western suburb of Chicago. And our church meets in a donut shop, which is a little fun and unusual. We have been meeting weekly for about a year, although, with church plants, there's a good 6 to 10 to 12 months lead up of all of the stages before you start meeting weekly. So it's hard I always wonder, what is our actual date, but meeting weekly for a year, and rolling along, like Josh was saying. Exciting things are happening, but it is a roller coaster to plant a church.
It sure is. We're going to talk about some of that roller coaster. Laura, welcome back, by the way, to the podcast. So I will have mentioned this in the intro. I'll give you bio for each of you guys and stuff. But Laura and I had a conversation, episode 74, if any listeners want to go back and hear about planting a church as a woman pastor. So let me give a little bit about my church plant. It's Mosaic Church. I've already mentioned this, but the four of us met through the Evangelical Covenant Church's cohort for new church plants. And so we spent 6 months together on Zoom every other week, and really was wonderful. It was wonderful to get to know you guys. And one other friend of ours that we just caught up with on Zoom that wasn't able to join us for the podcast. Our cohort was led by Peter Sung, and I just got to interview Peter in episode 87 of this podcast, which is just 2 episodes ago. And we're going to get into some of that. Peter just came out with a book called The Post-Church Church. And it sounds, you think about the title of that, and it's our culture is post-church. And a lot of us are still doing church in a church way, and our culture is post-church. And Peter is proposing some post-church ways of doing church. And so we're going to get into some of that. But I want to start with the reason I thought this conversation would be helpful for a podcast is because we're all church planting. We're all in early stages of church planting. I guess I forgot to finish my sort of story. Our church is about a year and a half old as well. We're 2 years in from me working on it full time. And we're in urban Grand Rapids, Michigan. So we're in the inner city. We're a multi-ethnic church. There's some unique challenges we face being urban and multi-ethnic. But we face the challenges of a 2-year-old church plant that I would say is, it depends on who you ask. If you ask certain people in my church, they're like, this is awesome. We love this. Like, people in churches that are in small churches, it doesn't bother them. This is like, there's community. They love it. For us as church planners, we feel pressure for things to be bigger. We feel pressure to grow. We have our own insecurities. We tell people, and I'm not speaking for you guys. I guess this is for me. And feel free. We'll turn this into a question as well. But there's, I want my church to grow. And if I could just be content with the small size that it is, I think that would be better. But there are financial pressures that we face for those of us trying to do this for our full-time jobs. Maybe that's not the best model. I don't know, because that certainly, plays a role in it as well. But culturally speaking, there's this fascination of big in the American church. And many, many people listen to the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast. and we heard the ins and outs of Mark Driscoll's Mars Hill and how huge it was. And for me, back in the mid 2000s, that church, his ministry, that was like the church. Every church plant wanted to be like his. I'm in Michigan here. Rob Bell's Mars Hill, unaffiliated with that one, but another sensation. Rob Bell wrote Velvet Elvis. He writes about how huge they launched. And then we all have our local church plants, sometimes in our network, sometimes not. And then people ask me or you guys, my least favorite question in the world. Usually it's the first question people ask when they find out you plant a church. How big is your church? And I'm like, that is like the only reason you want to know how big my church is, so you can judge me on if I'm a success or a failure. So I thought it would be helpful. We're not bashing big churches, but we see some dangers in that model. We see some dangers now in the big church model with Willow Creek, Hillsong, Mars Hill. These are national stories. So the four of us are not pastoring big churches. We are pastoring small churches. And I'm just, let's just kind of go around the circle and let's talk about this as a theory first. And then we'll go into like specifically what your churches are doing. But how do each of you wrestle with the, I'll call it pressure. You could use a different word, but there's a cultural standard maybe for big church. That's the church, that's success versus what you have, what I have, which is not a big church. Are you okay with that? Is that a good or a bad thing? And how do you each wrestle with that? Laura, we'll start with you as a returnee to the flip side. You get to go first.
All right. It's hard. I think I have served in several churches in the course of my career, and everything from very small, medium sized to very, very large. My last church job I worked at was a very large church. And so part of this planting process has been sort of an unlearning of some of the larger church models. So there is definitely a wrestling with that. And I think that in my area, at least in the Chicagoland suburbs, what a lot of churches are doing is going multi-site. And essentially that's almost like a franchise model where you are launching large. That's the language they use, launching large with like 250 people. They buy a building and they have a huge budget and multi-staff. And that's how they start a church. The way that I'm starting a church could not be more polar opposite to that. So you have to wrestle with every dollar. You have to wrestle with every decision in terms of program about what resources you want to allocate and how much you want to push people to be doing different things. So all of those are good. I think they're good and healthy questions of what is essential for the life of a church, because the essential is about all we have energy for. But I think it raises really good discussions around that. But there is an internal wrestling as well, because you do get that question, what size is your church and those kinds of things. And you do want to see it grow, I think. But the people, like you said, that are in a small church kind of enjoy it because they know each other. They feel cared for. They feel seen. That's great stuff. So, how to grow, but also to be manageable and to care well for the people you've got. That's the challenge.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Josh, you want to jump in next?
Sure. Yeah, I think I hear that pressure and I feel it. And at the same time, what we've come to, again, we're here in Boise. There are plenty of churches, and there are plenty of big churches in Boise. What we've come to is that kind of our success is built around not the size of the church, but a couple other things. One is the quality of our life together. So it's a lot easier in a lot of ways to really love one another. Like I can give a hug to every person in the room, and that's a joy, and everybody feels seen and known and loved. That's amazing. Another piece is like, just as I look at Jesus, we're always coming back to Jesus and what Jesus did. He worked really hard to limit the size of the crowds. And that sure seems to have done what it was intended to do in the ministry of his people. So I've come to kind of feel comfortable with a smaller community because it helps us be who we want to be following Jesus. And kind of the third thing is, like, for us here in Boise, we are a pretty unique community. There's just not a lot of churches like us. And so we just kind of go, we don't know what, like, if I had to do a market share analysis, I don't know that our market share is much bigger than it is now. But if we can look like Jesus, then I think then we've done the thing that God calls us to do. So it takes some work, internal work and constant work to be comfortable with that. But that's kind of where we've landed as a community. So
yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How about you, Cindy?
Yeah, it's very similar to Laura and Josh. I almost didn't go into church planting because I felt like I can't do the big church thing. That's just not who I am. It's not my personality, but I still felt God calling me to it and took the steps. And so it's always an internal struggle. And what I come back to where I find my footing is, what impact is our church making in the community? How are people experiencing the love of Jesus through our small little group? And how are the people that are a part of our church, how is their life being impacted? How are they growing? How deep are they growing in their own faith and in their own walk with Jesus? Because the reality is, very seldom is someone going to stay with our church forever. They're going to move on and go somewhere else. And so they get to pass through our doors and pass through some other doors. And so remembering that it's not just about this church, it's about the church. And am I being a faithful expression of what God's calling us to be and me to be, so that we can be a full body together? I can find my anchor when I remind myself of those concepts and ideas.
Yeah. Anchor is a good word, because it feels like the waves come and they hit us and they toss us in all these different directions. It's really easy, to get lost in the waves and chasing different metrics. That's so true, though. I planted my first church plant. We launched in 2006, and I was there 13 years. And I just went to a wedding this summer of a guy that I met when he was 16, and he just got married, mid-20s now, and got to reconnect with some people from that church that I haven't seen in a long time, and hear stories of people that are we did a park ministry where we didn't see a lot of fruit on like a Sunday morning level. That's actually where we met him. And, but to hear stories of people from the park ministry that are now in their mid-20s, and that, like, some of this fruit came 10 years later. Yeah. And like, that's awesome. But when you're the planter in the middle of it, it's not awesome, because you're like, no, I kind of need some of that fruit right now.
Right.
So the anchor, I what you said, Cindy, that's I really like that. I really like that a lot, because we're a part of something bigger than us, way bigger. God doesn't need us. He doesn't need our churches. But it can really feel like this whole thing rests on my shoulders, because I got to make this church plant, sustainable. I got to make it successful. So we're trying to figure it out. Yeah. And if you guys have questions you want to ask, to the rest of us, the four of us, jump in. I'm going to keep it moving so we don't have awkward silence, because you don't want that, on a podcast. Let's go. Right. But feel free to just jump in, change directions if you have questions you want to hear from the four of us. I want to ask us about this Sunday morning model. So I mentioned I just interviewed Peter Sung, who we all know and love, and his new book, Post-Church Church. And in his book, he essentially proposes, it's pretty provocative. I would call it prophetic, in the sense that it speaks a lot of truth to the current, the unhealth that's in the church. And I don't know, I guess I'm paraphrasing. There's a critique of this Sunday morning pastor-centered model of church. And there's and that the post-church church will not look like that. And we probably are 5 or 6 steps away. It's kind of what Peter said in the interview. Right now, we're taking more like baby steps on the way we do church. But I'm wondering, how have you three wrestled with that, because I wrestle with that. I wrestle with putting on the show each Sunday and wondering how effective is it really. I feel like people expect a sermon, they expect worship through music, and it needs to be good, and there needs to be a kids ministry, and it all needs to be good, and it's like, it can feel like you're putting on a product or a show and trying to get people, to like it. And then you go, is that really discipleship? Is that really what we're called to do? Let alone the pressure it puts on us as the MC, of the show. And I know some of you are doing church in creative ways and in sort of different ways. And so just give your thoughts in general on that concept that Peter proposes in his book that I'm kind of roughly paraphrasing. And then maybe what are some steps? Again, we're not retooling the whole system and the way we do church, but what are some steps that each of you are taking in your ministries to maybe kind of address some of those concerns that he's bringing up?
Well, I'll jump in. One of the things, there's so many fun things you get to try when you're a church planter and you're tiny. You kind of just try stuff and see what works. Yeah. But early on, I had a guy that comes to our church who told me after a sermon, like, you said a lot of really good things, but if I'm honest, I tuned out around minute 2. And he's like, I have ADD. It's not you, it's me. And he's like, but he said, before we started meeting weekly for church services, he's like, we did a lot more discussion. And he said, when we had discussion, I would go home and I would think about the conversation. He said, so is there a way that we could do that during church? And so I thought, well, yeah, let's try it. So we started adding discussion questions in the middle of our sermons. So I'll preach, and then we'll take a break and we throw up some discussion questions on the screen. People circle up at their tables. Again, we're in a donut shop, so there are tables and chairs, and people talk about things. And our teenagers too, have said that's one of their favorite parts of the service, because it allows them to process out loud what they're hearing and learning with each other. And so they're more likely to take it with them into the week. That's one thing. I think also for pastors and people in ministry, it's real hard, because it does start to feel like a show, to be able to enter into worship yourself. Mm-hmm. So another small thing we've done is we do brunch church the last Sunday of every month. So it's a potluck brunch. Everybody brings something and we eat together for the first half an hour of our service. We don't do anything else. There's no structure. We just eat together. And then we do a very abbreviated communion service at the end. And there's a small message. But a lot of that's because I wanted our people to get to know each other, and we love food. And to me, that feels restful. And as church planners, we're doing a lot of things. And so it's nice to have one Sunday a month where I'm doing less and getting to be with people more. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah. We've started doing something similar where we do a Sabbath Sunday. It's not consistent. Sometimes it's when the pastor's tired. This week's going to be a Sabbath Sunday. Amen. And everybody's great with that. And I think it's a great model for us to show people the value of Sabbath. And another thing that we do a little differently is I'll give like a little, I guess you call it sermonette, devotion-esque kind of message, and ask one question and see where the conversation goes. And sometimes that's a whole lot better sermon than I could preach with the time I have to prepare. But it doesn't mean I have to be less prepared, because the questions that come up are usually way deeper than I've gone, or from an angle I haven't gone. So I'm finding we grow deeper and maybe even more holistic in our faith when we all have a voice in those worship times.
Mm.
Yeah. And I would just emphasize that language, having a voice, like who are we giving a voice to, how often and when? Because for us, that has been a really central piece. We've been trying as much as we can, like we have a goal, and we're trying to be as rigorous about that as possible. But we're working to give as many people voice as possible. We believe that the kids and those who don't know Jesus yet are as essential, and maybe sometimes more essential than the rest of us are. And we're working really hard to kind of work against the consumer model of church. Peter talks some about that, but in conversations with Peter, he and I have had even more conversations about the consumer model. So we push really hard, partly because the consumer model, right, is built around there's a person who knows what they're doing and is putting on the show for everybody else, and everybody else is then in the role of the consumer, which means that they're not in the role of like having voice or being discipled. Even really, what they're doing is sitting back and taking in a show. And just as a pedagogical model, it doesn't work. Like people don't actually learn under that model very well that's what we've come to. So we're constantly trying to figure out places we can give voice. So I preach once a month. Most of the time when I preach, I'll either do a Q&A session afterwards, but even Q&A, we have our questions about, because that puts me in the role of the expert. So even that, I'm like, I'm not sure that I want to do Q&A as much as we can give other people a voice. Now, Q&A is great because people ask some really difficult and fun questions. And I prepare as well as I can, Sydney, but I never am ready for that one question.
Right. It's true.
But kind of, I think my favorite thing that we're doing is we have every other week, we do meet in small groups, and our small groups aren't.
And that's on Sunday morning, right, Josh?
Well, we're Sunday afternoon, so we're taking apart the Pastor Center and the Sunday morning.
That's right. You're right. But sorry to interrupt, but you're replacing your Sunday service with small groups at the same time slot. That's pretty key.
Same time slot. Yeah, that's right. So we do same time slot. We do our small groups. Our small groups are all going through the Gospels. They will, at least for the foreseeable future, we will just remain in the Gospels because we just want to spend time with Jesus. And people come and ask their questions and make their observations. And then after our small groups have gathered for about an hour, usually they get together and we do takeaways together as a community. And so the whole community comes together and the kids get up and share, hey, this is what I learned. And, the guy who just walked in off the street comes in, hey, this is what I learned this week. And so we get all kinds of people sharing. Again, we get sermon content without me having to prepare a sermon, right? And that sermon content is kind of crowd shared among the community, and so crowdsourced among the community. And so it's we feel like it's good discipleship. People come away with, this is what I learned this week, and it's kind of works against that consumer structure. So, yeah. So I'm a big fan of what Peter's doing. I hope we're wrestling in ways that he approves of and are headed the same direction he is. So
nice. Yeah. Cindy, I love what you said about the Sabbath Sunday. When you said something about when the pastor's tired, sometimes is when we do it. And right. This is my second church plant. I've been senior pastoring, I guess, for a long time. And I feel like there's this unspoken rule that the senior pastor is never allowed to be tired. And I think we've seen that play out in, the American church at large, some of these big name meltdowns that we've seen. I think it's something wrong. I think it's something wrong in the church is this, I don't know. It just feels like it can feel like, one, as a senior pastor, you just have to fake it. You just have to act like you love Jesus and everything's perfect because you're selling this product. You're selling the Jesus product. And so if you had something you were discouraged about or tired, you're just human, first of all, so like you get tired. Yeah. I just think it's really important to talk about health among pastors. And I'll kind of answer the last question and for our church context, and then we're going to lead into a new question on this health issue. So one thing is a transitionary answer, because one thing we're going to start doing, I've mentioned this on the podcast recently, is transitioning into a co-pastor model. And by co-pastor, I mean like co-senior pastor. I was able to transition my first church plant to that about 7 years in. This time it's going to be more like 2 or 3 years in. And I need that. I'm feeling led by God to do it. I'm reading about it in books like Church of Tove by Scott McKnight. And, I think there's something really healthy about it. But for my own drive and personality and leadership style, I just think it is a really good check and balance for me. And there's just so many really good things about it. So that's one thing we're doing to, like, in that sort of the point that Peter made, the pastor centric, Sunday morning centric thing. I think that'll be an ingredient that'll help us, with that. But let's talk about our health and emotions and kind of the roller coaster, Laura, that you mentioned. Could each of you just share just what some of the emotional roller coaster has been? I know, like, Josh, I wish I could just be like you. I feel like you are always just like peaceful and you just like, I love that about you. I say that genuinely, but I'm making you turn red too. So I like that I'm doing that to you right now. What have been the ups and downs for all three of you? And then the second part of that question is what do you do? What are some disciplines or some structures in your life that you do, to stay healthy, to stay grounded, to stay anchored?
I'll jump in right now, Noah, because what you didn't see was 2020. I burned out.
Yeah.
By the time we met, I had gone through a year of burnout and was just starting to figure out, okay, what rhythms are going to be necessary for me.
Good.
So the key things for me, rhythm wise, I've got my monthly retreat where I take first Monday of the month and I go and spend time with Jesus and spend some time planning the month, but mostly it's just sitting with Jesus. And I usually hike in the hills around here. I've got my weekly Sabbath. I've got my daily stuff, just prayer time with the Lord. And then it's been big for me, again, mentioning the model that we use. I'm not the center of the thing. So it feels peaceful and it doesn't feel like stress to be in there every week.
Thanks.
Really good. I'm listening and I'm thinking, I've got some goals in terms of like a monthly retreat, like working on some of those things. Totally. That's so good, Josh. I think collaborative leadership is a big part of it. But emotionally, I think church planning, it's so easy to tie up your own worth and value into the progress of your church. And so I think you really have to stay attuned to that, name it when you see it. It will happen. So it's not a question of avoiding it. It will happen. And so how you process that and realize that. One of the things I love about our denomination, at least in my little corner of the world, is the emphasis on spiritual direction and therapy for pastors. I've been in ministry for a long time in a lot of different settings. This is the first setting where I've heard repeatedly from senior leadership within the denomination that every pastor should be meeting with a therapist and a spiritual director, because pastors need care. Pastors need care. And that was such a revolutionary idea for me. And once I heard it, I was like, well, that just seems obvious. But again, years of ministry, and I had never heard that before. And I'm so grateful for it because we do a lot of pouring out and a lot of caring for others. And we need places that are safe where we can be cared for as well. So I think that's really critical.
I think that's huge. And as I'm listening to you, Laura, I'm thinking we would tell anybody that comes to us for help, go to a spiritual director, go to a therapist. You're worth that. You're that valuable. And so by us doing that, we're reminding ourselves of that value that you were talking about. And it is very important. And also, in addition to that, it's very important for me to have pastors who have been there, done that, not necessarily a church planting thing, but a couple of retired pastors that I get together with, and we just talk about life. They check in with me. How are you doing? How's your family doing? And they have no skin in the game other than to hear me and to hear what's going on with me. And I have found my most healing moments have been just being listened to by them and being encouraged that either they had a similar experience or, anybody that's gone before us is powerful. And Yeah, I know when I've not had enough of those
Yeah.
moments.
Yeah, that's really good. I'll second the therapy and spiritual direction as well. I developed an email team, and I have my big prayer team, which I love and appreciate. That's like my financial supporters and lots of people that are on there praying for me. And I'm pretty real in those. I mean, I never lie. I'm real. I'm raw. But I have a group of 9 guys, and I emailed guys because I send my sexual temptation to stuff to them. It ends up being a lot of stuff about like depression that I'm feeling as well, discouragements, and it's just my raw, like real. These are mentors in my life, I've been doing that now for 3-4 years, and it's been really, really fruitful for me. I have a Zoom group on Saturday morning of guys I meet with that are from like my Beyond the Battle life. And so it's not church related. And we do some really deep accountability, really deep, just kind of identity work, our identity being in Christ. And that's been really good for me too. So I'll throw that in there. And I have a really firm Monday Sabbath. And I'm not good at, I too listen to Josh. I'm like, I need a retreat day. I need those things, but I am good at my Monday Sabbath. I really think I would die without it. I just really, really need that. So we've just got a few minutes left. We have a time cutoff. And so I'm going to go around and just ask if there's anything else that you would like to share about our conversation, and or if you want to try to squeeze one last question in for the rest of us to answer. We'll try to do that here briefly in the next few minutes.
I would just love to hear from you guys. Why church plant? I know, because I know some of your stories, and I know that you all have been in ministry. So I have no idea. Balloons.
Keep going, Laura.
Yeah. Well, just hearing from you guys why you pursued church planting, and how you felt called to that. But what is the purpose of church planting within the wider church? If you could have been a minister somewhere else in some other setting, why did you choose church planting?
I think Josh did that to me, putting those balloons up on my screen.
I wish I knew how to do that. I would be all in for that.
Church planting for me, it's a way to reach people for the gospel, for Jesus. And I'm really passionate about that. And frankly, I have a sense of discontent about the status quo of church. There's some really good ones out there, but there's a lot of churches that are just treading water. And I early on, I was really had a heart for outreach, and just church planting was the way, the path. And I am a little bit of I don't know, I don't like to follow rules and things like that. And I'm a creative person. I'm a visionary person to create things. And so it just, it's been a really good path for me to use my leadership skills in that way, and my passion to see people come to know Jesus in creative ways.
Mm-hmm. I've asked myself that question a lot lately, because I'm surrounded by churches, good churches, and it's people would call it a Christian community. And what I'm coming to see is church planting, yes, is about planting something new and the gospel and people meeting Jesus for the first time and jumping on board with him. But it's also about new life now, wherever I'm at in my journey. And that's what I'm seeing in our community, that need for a fresh perspective of God, a fresh perspective of Jesus and what it means to be a follower of him. And that's where I get excited, is when I see that spark return to someone's eyes, or that passion come back that they've lost.
That's good. What about you, Josh?
It's really good, Cindy. Thanks. And I don't know if you can hear, but my daughter's playing piano. She's writing us. It's great. For me, man, I still don't know why I'm church planting. I wish I had some great principles that I was working from, but really for me, it came down to, I felt really strongly the clear call of God to do it. And as we've gotten started here in Boise, what we keep seeing is people coming in, and Boise church culture is a unique church culture, just like every other church culture is unique in its own ways. But I feel like we're serving the folks who are like, I was kind of done with church, wasn't going back, and I found you guys, and I feel like I can hang out here. And so that's kind of what we've experienced is Jesus is drawing that person. And so in a lot of ways we're unique in Boise. And so I just have continued to sense God's call that this is what we're supposed to do. And so we keep doing it.
It's good.
What about for you, Laura? And then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a call. It's not something that I ever had on my radar as something I would do. It's because God called me to it. But I get excited because I do think it's an opportunity to follow God, like for me personally, into unknown territory, but also to see God's hand at work in people's lives. And it's God calling new people to himself, but also people that have been hurt and burned by the church, rediscovering the goodness of church community. And I think it gives us a chance to also do something that may speak to the wider church about, what is essential in the life of a church community. And I think we are in some ways creating new territory because we do get to try some things. We get to be creative. And I think that we are pursuing some things that maybe the wider church might try to adapt in the future. So I get excited about that. Yeah, for sure.
Any last closing quick thoughts? I know we've got schedules, we've got to go, but just around the horn, if not, totally okay. But anyone want to share a last thought about the conversation for listeners before we sign off?
I don't know. I just feel compelled to say, if anybody's listening that feels called to church planting and you're wondering, am I doing the right thing? Or am I in the right place?
Yeah,
you are. Just keep taking steps.
Love it.
No, I'm just excited about your podcast and saying hi to all the Filipiapotami out there.
Oh, thank you. My third favorite podcast, Josh.
Yeah. I don't have a mug. You
should become a paid patron and then you get one. So
you sent Greg a mug, didn't you? Or
he was oh no. Oh, I see. So because he was he did 2 episodes though. So I'll send Laura a mug. Once you do 2, you get a mug.
Oh,
sweet.
Oh, goodness.
Laura, how about you? Close us out here with some respectability.
That's tough. I am just excited to be part of this group because I think that church planning can be a very lonely business. And it is good to connect with other people who know what it's like and the amount of risk you're taking on, the crazy ways that you question yourself and your call because of, odd things that happen, on a weekly basis. But just the encouragement from being with like-minded people is really, really good.
Yeah, I agree.
That's awesome. Well, this has been really fun. And it's like a little reunion here for us. We're all over the country, and our friend was on earlier who's in Seattle. We get to catch up from our cohort. And so I just love that God is at work all over the country in these small ways. Amen. I think Jesus' ministry was very small. A lot of his metaphors were very small, the faith of a mustard seed, and you see the way God works. And so I love the work we're all doing. I love being reminded that as we all labor, we're laboring together. And let's be honest, there's lots of churches like ours out there. There's lots and lots of small churches that aren't making the headlines with just faithful lovers of Jesus trying to shine his light. So I just praise God for that. And if you're a listener in one of those churches, praise God. And if you just go to church, if you're not going to church somewhere, go to church, get involved, join community, make sure it's authentic. That's really what we're about. So thank each of you so much. Laura, Josh, Cindy, thanks for joining us here on the flip side. This has been really wonderful.
Heard the sound of freedom. Have you ever heard the sound of freedom?
All right. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. We were up against the clock a little bit. We had actually met prior to this interview with another member of our cohort, and we did some updates on how everybody was doing. We prayed for each other, and we just had somebody in our group that had to go at a certain time. So hopefully it didn't feel too rushed or cut off or anything. I know we could have talked longer, and there's a lot of good stuff to talk about. But I hope that was encouraging conversation for you. I hope it was inspiring, and I don't know. I just trust the Spirit to use that. Maybe it'll help you pray for your pastor or pastor team, and help pray for them. Send them some encouragement. If you're in church leadership, maybe to think critically, about what makes a healthy church. And I know it's a thing too. Laura asked me or asked us why we planted a church, and I really do appreciate in a church plant. And I know I take this for granted for all of you out there who are working in established churches. It's really hard to make changes in established churches. So I just want to acknowledge that. One thing I like about church planting is you can change things. And especially at the beginning, you can change, like Josh is doing at RCB in Boise. They're doing every other Sunday. I hope you caught that. They're doing like a sort of a more traditional worship service, singing, preaching. And then every other Sunday, they're doing their small groups for their church. So if you were a visitor and you showed up, like ready for a sermon and songs, guess what? You're going to sit in a group and you're going to have conversation. And when you're a church plant, you can start that way. We do discussion questions. Like what Laura mentioned they're doing. That's encouraging to hear, because we do that at Mosaic. We do during the first worship set, we stop, and during some of our announcements, we have people break into groups, and we have leaders, and it's sort of a icebreaker conversation time where it's a guided conversation to get to know the people you're sitting with. And then during the sermon, we break and we do some discussion around the topic of the sermon. And those are the type of things, I get it. If you're in an established church, you can't just, even if you're the senior pastor, you still don't get to make those decisions, because you got to run it by your elder team or your board or whatever. But even if you did, it would really rattle people. I get it. It would rattle people if you were like, every other week, we're not going to have preaching and singing. We're going to do groups. People would revolt. I mean, right? Because we're creatures of habit. We're used to what we're used to. And that's part of this tension, even the conversation with Peter and the post-church church. It's, I guess I'm saying two things. One, people are used to what they're used to, so change is going to be hard. So doing something that's a little bit different, I would say, really, you got to do things gradually. You need to know your context, and don't be reckless with it. Or, hey, just go plant the church, like Cindy said. If you really have some, creative things cooking. But I just want to acknowledge that. I think for us as church planters, we take it for granted a little bit that we can do things outside of the box. And I love that. And as Laura said, maybe we can teach the established church some things, but I don't, I feel for you that are leading established churches that I know you don't have, the freedom to do that. But even in a plant now, we're a year and a half into doing Sunday services. And I do feel that where we can't not make drastic changes to what we currently are doing, but we do always have to be, and this is, I think any church can do this, always be evaluating what you are doing and say, okay, within the construct of this community that we've created, this culture we've created, what can we be doing? Is this effective? Is this an effective method of discipleship? Is this an effective method of growth, of building community? And if it's not, don't just keep doing it because you've always done it, right? I mean, I think we have to be in church spaces where we can adjust, because it's not about numbers, as we just talked about, but let's in that your church doesn't have to be growing, but let's be honest, the amount of people going to church in our culture is shrinking. Peter and I talked about that. His book talks about that. The average church size right now is 60, which there's no shame in that. That's what many of the church plants that you just heard today, we are around that size. But it says something that I don't remember the stat. I think 20 years ago or something, the average church size was much more than that, 150 or 200 or something like that. Again, those are just paraphrased. podcast stats. Don't hold me to that. But the point is, something's happening in our culture. People are dissatisfied with this current structure of church. They're dissatisfied with the Sunday morning preaching, singing, even though it might be working for you and it might be working in your context. But I think, too, there's a lot of reasons people are deconstructing their faith. I do encourage you to subscribe to the audio side. So we have YouTube, but then we also have the audio feed. If you subscribe there, you'll get 5-minute flips. And I've been talking about deconstruction and different reasons people are deconstructing. And that's a big thing that's happening. And I don't know if it's just people in their 30s and 40s, kind of around my generation, or not. Chime in on that. Let me know. But all that to say, we in church leadership, we need to be paying attention to that. And we need to be saying, okay, what do we need to be doing differently? What topics do we need to be talking about? How do we need to... There's Christian nationalism is on the rise. I just interviewed Glenn Bracey and Michael Emerson about white Christian nationalism. That was just a few episodes ago. And so there's certain topics that if you talk about them, you're going to chase away the sort of standard churchgoer, standard Christian that likes everything kind of cookie cutter. And so you might shrink, but you may reach people that have been deconstructing their faith and have left the church and are saying, that doesn't work for me anymore. I've been burned by all that. And that's fruit. That's ministry fruit. And so just be thinking about those things in your church leadership settings, in your pastoral settings, and just in your life as a Christian. I hope that's something we do well on the flip side, is to challenge you in those ways of how to think about some of these really tough issues that are making people leave the church, and to create a space where you can think critically and you can think critically and start to interact with some of these things in a way that you may not get to do on Sunday morning. But I hope that it influences what happens to you on Sunday morning, that it influences who you are within your church setting. So I'll wrap it up there. Thanks so much for listening. Big thanks to Laura, Cindy, and Josh for coming on. It was a lot of fun. And if you want to support the show, patreon.com/Noah Filipiak. If you want to support me and my endeavor to go to a part-time co-pastor model to be able to continue writing, podcasting, and such, noahfilipiak.com/give. And I will see you next time on The Flip Side.
The Flip Side with Noah Filipiak is a Beyond Ministries production. Copyright Noah Filipiak. www.noahfilipiak.com. Theme music by Kyle Lake at K-Lake Music. Used with permission. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and subscribe wherever podcasts are found.
It's time to bring me closer. There's no purgatory, cause you're in or you're out. When you see them in the clouds, then you know it's going down. Raise them, raise them, raise them. They've been sleeping for some ages. Now all God's babies so confused by this hatred. Pulpit preachers shouldn't aim to be A-list. Money probably long, but short is what your days.